Rachel Delaney stepped through the courthouse doors wearing 2 coats and a silence thicker than the December frost. Her weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the Afghan winter that had settled in her bones decades ago and never left. She moved slowly, the way someone moves when they've learned to save steps. The waiting room's wooden bench groaned as she settled onto it, hands tucked under her arms. Her boots, old army issue with rubber soles worn thin, left faint prints on the tile floor. At 70, Rachel carried herself with the quiet dignity that comes from surviving things most people only see in movies. She opened her frayed wallet and pulled out a plastic ID that had once been blue but now resembled gray dishwater. The edges curled like autumn leaves as she reached to pass it to the clerk. A whisper floated from behind. "Looks like it's from the Bush era," someone chuckled. Another voice, a woman maybe mid-30s, murmured, "Why is she even here? Don't they have VA hospitals for these people?" The clerk, a man no older than 30, took the ID between 2 fingers like it might crumble in his hand. He gave Rachel a quick glance and didn't bother hiding his smirk. "Name?" he asked. Rachel didn't lift her head. "Rachel Delaney." The clerk tapped at a keyboard, the clicks crisp and impatient. "You're up. Sit tight." Rachel nodded and slid back down the bench. She returned the ID to her wallet and placed it carefully inside her coat, layer 1 of 2. The outer was green military grade, patched at the elbows with brown corduroy. The inner was a navy peacoat missing 2 buttons. Both held a lingering smell of dryer sheets and cafeteria soup. In her pocket, her fingers curled instinctively around a small metal disc, dulled smooth by time, a medallion from Kandahar, given to her by a soldier who hadn't made it home. Across the waiting area, a man leaned in to whisper something to his wife, glancing at Rachel's feet. She didn't respond, just offered a tight-lipped nod and shifted her purse to the other side. Further down the row, a teenager raised her phone. The shutter click, barely audible as she snapped a photo, didn't make Rachel flinch. She turned instead to the newspaper beside her. It was that morning's Greenville Tribune, left on the seat by someone who'd finished their citation before her. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the thin pages. Halfway down page A3 was a column she'd read before, twice, actually, a piece titled, "We Forget the Ones Who Fought." The edges were already worn, but Rachel read it again anyway. Not for the content, she'd lived that part, but for the idea that someone out there, someone younger, might have remembered long enough to put pen to paper. A door opened to the left. A bailiff, gray-haired with a gut like a beer keg, stepped out and called, "Rachel Delaney." Rachel stood with effort, knees stiff from too many winters on concrete. She grunted softly, more to herself than anyone else, and walked the short distance to the glass divider. The bailiff raised an eyebrow. Loitering on city property, the man muttered, looking over the file. "Heater vent by the courthouse steps last night." Rachel nodded once. "Address?" the clerk asked, half looking at his screen. "Veterans Shelter," Rachel replied, voice low. "Room 2C." The clerk snorted and typed. "You've been cited before." Rachel didn't answer. From somewhere near the back, a boy laughed. "Dude, she should get frequent flyer miles here." More chuckles followed. A woman coughed to cover her own. Rachel let the noise pass over her like smoke. She had heard worse, screaming, shouting, the thunder of things breaking. Compared to that, this was just background hum. She took the seat indicated by the bailiff, second row from the front. A hard wooden chair with a crack running through the backrest. A fluorescent light above flickered faintly, casting intermittent shadows across the courtroom seal on the wall. The room smelled like dust and stale coffee. Maybe a hint of floor polish that hadn't quite masked the scuff marks to her left. Luis Moreno watched from behind a column. He hadn't meant to be seen, wearing his diner apron and holding a to-go cup of coffee. He'd come only out of habit, having noticed Rachel missing from her usual spot near the alley behind the diner. Now, seeing her in the courtroom stirred something, though he didn't yet have the name to match the suspicion forming in his gut. Rachel sat with her hands folded over one knee, thumbs still moving across the edges of the medallion in her coat. She stared ahead, eyes not focusing on anything particular, just being present, just surviving the moment. Case 17C, the bailiff intoned. State of Missouri versus Rachel Delaney. More whispers. Some heads turned, curious. The door behind the bench remained closed. A teenager pulled out her phone again. This time, Rachel noticed, but she didn't move. Her address, Veterans Shelter Room 2C, was now displayed on the docket screen overhead in yellow block letters. Some in the gallery squinted. A man in a business jacket laughed through his nose. Room 2C, he repeated under his breath, nudging the person beside him. Guess she's a regular. Rachel blinked once. That was all. The double doors behind the judge's bench creaked. The laughter hushed just slightly, not from guilt, but from protocol. Judge Caroline Whitmore entered, adjusting her glasses and flipping through the docket. She froze at one name, Delaney, Rachel. Caroline Whitmore shut her chamber door softly and locked it, heart pacing faster than her polished demeanor allowed. The latch clicked with a finality that echoed louder than it should have. She stood there a moment, one hand still on the doorknob, the other clutching the docket folder. It was just paper, ink, staples, case numbers, but one name had seized her breath like a hand around her throat. Delaney, Rachel. She crossed the room slowly, heels quiet against the worn parquet floor, and set the folder down on her desk with care usually reserved for china. Her chambers were quiet, always had been. Morning light filtered through the blinds, stretching across the wall like the long shadows of memory. Between her degrees and bar admissions hung a photograph in a modest frame, Lieutenant Harold Whitmore, 42, in uniform, a shy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Beside him stood a slender woman, just slightly blurred like the past trying to remain anonymous. Caroline reached into the drawer beneath that photo and pulled out a small black lockbox. She hadn't opened it in years. The key lived inside her jewelry box, tucked between a pearl earring and a dried corsage from her first judicial gala. Her fingers didn't tremble as she unlocked it, but something deeper did. Inside lay a stack of letters bound in a blue ribbon. Paper so old it had yellowed at the edges. She unwrapped them carefully, as if she might damage the voice within. One envelope near the top had her name on it, Caroline, age 16. She remembered reading it aloud the night it came, sitting on the carpet while her mother wept silently beside her. But it wasn't that one she sought. She flipped gently until she found it, dated April 2005. The corner still bore the oily thumbprint of a man in a bunker. The ink had bled slightly, but the writing was unmistakably her father's. Delaney ran through mortar fire to get to me. If I don't make it home, find her. The words pulled something loose inside her. Not grief exactly, it had aged into something else, a hum of unfinished obligation. She hadn't seen the name Delaney since then. She'd even searched once during law school, but the trail went cold. Now, it sat on her docket. She set the letter on her desk and sank into the leather chair behind it. Her breath caught in her throat. The office was warm, but she rubbed her hands together anyway. A nervous reflex. Her gaze drifted to the sealed window. Downstairs, a city moved on without memory. Horns honking, people rushing past the courthouse, coffee cooling on car dashboards. She picked up the letter again, scanned the line once more. Same spelling, same middle initial. The combat medic Delaney who'd carried her father from a burning outpost in Kandahar. Her father hadn't made it home. A roadside bomb 2 weeks later. They told her mother at the kitchen table over lukewarm tea and hands that didn't know where to rest. She remembered the flag, the silence, the single sentence from a soldier at the funeral, he wasn't supposed to make it that far. Delaney gave us more time. At 16, she didn't fully understand what that meant. At 58, it had never stopped meaning something. She stared at the docket. Rachel Delaney, not a common name, not a coincidence. She lifted the docket closer. Veterans Shelter Room 2C, loitering charge, found behind a heater vent in 30-degree weather. The name on the docket and the one in her father's letter, they weren't just similar. They were her. Caroline reached for her mug, white ceramic worn at the lip, bearing the words, Greenville Rotary Club. Her father's mug, a gift from a barbecue he took her to when she was 14, wearing the same aviators he'd later be buried with. She sipped. The coffee had gone cold and bitter, diner-quality decaf brewed hours ago, but she barely noticed. Should she recuse herself? The thought rolled in heavy and unwelcome. She'd handled high-profile cases, murder trials, federal inquiries, but this felt harder, more intimate. The judiciary demanded objectivity, but what of obligation? What of unfinished thanks? Her eyes flicked back to the letter. If I don't make it home, find her. How many years had she carried that line? Caroline stood slowly, folding the letter with precision and sliding it into her robe's inner pocket. Her hand remained there a moment longer than needed, as if anchoring herself to that final echo of her father's voice. If it is her, she whispered aloud, then I've waited long enough. The hallway was quiet when she exited her chambers. Her heels echoed with familiar weight. She nodded once to the bailiff outside the courtroom door, who opened it without question. The murmurs in the room dropped to a hush. Caroline crossed to the bench, her face calm, though something behind her eyes had shifted. She adjusted her glasses and flipped the docket open again. She looked up for the first time and asked, Ms. Delaney, where exactly did you serve? Rachel paused, then said the words slowly, like dust shaken off a locked box. Kandahar, 2003 to 2007. 68 Whiskey. Combat Medic, 3rd Battalion. The room didn't move. It didn't breathe. Somewhere behind her, a chair creaked softly, but even that sound felt like an intrusion. The judge's eyes remained steady, but her fingers reached instinctively toward the inner pocket of her robe, where her father's letter rested like a heartbeat from the past. I remember, Rachel continued, voice low, rough like gravel beneath tires. Lieutenant Whitmore took shrapnel trying to shield his radio operator. We were pinned behind a burned-out Humvee. I pulled him behind a mound of sandbags, most of them already blown through. No one interrupted. The courtroom had quieted into something close to reverence. The heater ticked against the wall, the only rhythm breaking the stillness. Through the tall windows, school children could be seen walking home from a Veterans Week assembly, paper flags waving from gloved hands, unaware of the ghost speaking inside. What happened next? The judge asked, her voice calm, though it carried a current beneath it. Rachel didn't look at her. She stared at the floor, or maybe through it. He was medevaced out. They lifted him before sunset. I never knew if he made it. Silence folded back over the room, thicker this time. Then a chair scraped. Tom Redkinley stood in the second row, his Marine League jacket stretched tight over his chest. A faded cap reading, Kandahar 05, tilted just so. He did, Red said, voice gravelly but certain. For 2 weeks. I was there, and Rachel saved 6 of us that day. He didn't sit back down. Gasps didn't fill the room. Instead, it was a soft inhale, collective, uncertain. Something began to shift in the gallery, like a crowd leaning toward the same sudden wind. Luis Moreno stepped forward. He hadn't meant to speak. Not yet. But his feet moved before his thoughts did. He held a folded black and white photo in his hand, thumb running the edge without realizing. Sir, Luis's voice wavered at first, then steadied. My father told me a woman named Delaney carried him after a mortar blast in the mountains. He'd never seen her before that day. Never saw her again, but he said. Luis paused, the words hitting a raw place. He said, if you ever meet her, you say thank you. Rachel turned slightly, enough to look in his eyes for the first time. Something unspoken passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but something older, like a promise remembered. From the benches, whispers turned to stillness. People no longer leaned back or whispered. Their posture changed. Their attention changed. The bailiff swallowed visibly. Even the prosecutor, who had been preparing notes on a legal pad, lowered his pen and set it aside. The judge rose, not abruptly, not theatrically. She pushed back her chair with control and stood tall in her black robe, her hands still at her side. Then slowly, deliberately, she brought her right hand to her brow and saluted Rachel Delaney. The room didn't gasp. It didn't cheer. It didn't move. It simply stood still, as if paying respect demanded silence more than sound. Rachel's jaw tightened, her eyes locked ahead. She didn't return the salute, not out of defiance, but because something inside her froze. Something buried too long to know how to move under the weight of sudden recognition. The judge's hand dropped. Her voice cracked. "This court will recess. Sergeant Delaney, I'll see you in chambers." The apartment was quiet except for the soft rattle of a heater kicking on and the crinkle of a letter pulled from an old shoebox. Rachel sat at the small wooden table. One hand on a chipped ceramic mug, steam curling from the black coffee inside. The other held the yellowed envelope gently, like a page from scripture. Outside, snow flurries ticked softly against the window, drifting sideways in lazy spirals. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of ghosts, of years finally still. She'd kept the place tidy. The bed was made, linens tucked tight the way she'd learned back in basic. A pair of boots sat by the radiator, dry now. On a narrow shelf near the television rested the medals, newly pinned and barely touched, but her fingers returned again and again to the worn medallion in her pocket, smoothed by decades, unchanged by ceremony. The knock came softly. Once, then twice. Rachel opened the door to find Caroline Whitmore. Not Judge Whitmore. Not today. Standing in a navy cardigan, hair down, a soft scarf looped once at her collar. In her hands, a weathered cardboard box, edges reinforced with yellowing tape. "May I come in?" she asked. Rachel stepped aside and gestured silently toward the kitchen table. Caroline crossed the room slowly, taking in the space without comment. The clean counter, the single chair, the newspaper folded just so on the sill. She placed the box gently beside the mug. "These were my father's," she said. "He wrote home every week. I thought maybe you'd want to read what he said." Rachel nodded. "I never did know if he made it. I only saw him lift it out." For the first time in decades, Rachel Delaney walked through Greenville in daylight, and people looked at her, not past her. The morning air carried a warmth rare for mid-December, just enough to soften the frost clinging to Main Street's curb edges. The sky arched cloudless above rows of red, white, and blue bunting strung across lamp posts. Flags fluttered gently with each breeze, and the smell of cinnamon cider and pumpkin bread drifted from a folding table set up by the Methodist church. Rachel's boots struck the asphalt with calm precision, each step echoing the rhythm of a marching band tuning up down the block. She wore her best pressed khaki trousers, a navy blue service jacket, and a new name tag glinting just below the ribbon rack. The Bronze Star ribbon sat centered, flanked by medals older than many in the crowd. Every pin had been returned, repolished, or replaced by someone who believed she was worth the effort. Children pointed, some waved. One little girl gasped, nudged her father, and whispered something Rachel didn't catch, but the father looked up and nodded. She nodded back. Luis Moreno was helping at the cider stand, his sleeves rolled and cheeks ruddy from hauling boxes. He caught Rachel's eye and raised a paper cup in silent salute. Behind him, Red Kinley handed out miniature flags from a cardboard box marked, VFW Post 113. The old Marine's cap tilted against the breeze, but his posture was straight, his expression full of pride. The school band struck the first notes of When the Saints Go Marching In, not quite on key, but enthusiastic. They marched past the library steps. A banner carried ahead of them read, Greenville Remembers. At the podium set atop the courthouse steps, Caroline Whitmore stepped to the mic. Her voice, though amplified, was gentle. Each year we honor those who served. Some names are known, some remain unspoken. But today, she paused, scanning the crowd, we speak one name we forgot for far too long. She glanced at Rachel, her eyes soft but unwavering. Sergeant Rachel Delaney, she continued, once saved lives without seeking credit. Today, we give it. Applause swelled like water rising fast. People rose from folding chairs. A few removed their hats. In the third row, a girl in braids raised her hand in a lopsided salute, the kind taught in school but never practiced much. Rachel saw it, and her lips pressed together. Not in refusal, but in restraint. She stepped forward to the small platform, adjusted the mic. I'm no hero, she began, just a soldier who tried to do right. That was it. No grand speech, just the truth, as it had always lived in her. Sometimes what we dismiss as forgotten is only waiting to be remembered. And dignity, like truth, doesn't fade with weathered coats or silent years. A single act of kindness, seen or unseen, can echo across lifetimes. If this story has stirred something in you, perhaps today is the right moment to notice someone who's been unseen too long. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about the veterans who deserve our respect.